Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about politics. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, are there any good questions you can ask a hiring manager or tech lead to get an idea how they deal with company politics? I'm interviewing for a position where hiring managers hasn't been at the company for too long, about 6 months, and there have been some recent Glassdoor reviews talking about leaving because of company politics. Well, so this is a little bit tricky because it's hard to answer the question, okay, how do you deal with company politics? If you were to, like, let's be very blunt and ask that specific question to a manager. Well, if you were to ask me how I deal with company politics, if I'm supposed to be your manager, well, my first question would be, what do you mean by company politics? Because it can mean so many things. Does it mean that you're not getting promoted? Does it mean that you have to do things in a certain way that you don't like because of company policy? Is it lead times for waiting for third-party dependencies? Like, what are you talking about? Because if you ask, and I always say this, if you ask a like three different people what their biggest problem is with, say, the coding or something like that, most of them will give you a range of answers. Like, you will get different opinions of what a specific issue is about. Like, a lot of stuff might be overlap, but in many cases it has different meanings for different people. And company politics is one of those sort of things. I mean, it's very difficult for a manager to answer that question, and it's even more difficult for you to get a comprehensible answer. This is a question that is very similar to, as I've said before, if you ask, do you do testing in the interviewing process? 99% of them are going to answer you, yes, of course we do testing. And then you get into the company and you will realize, if you've been to a few companies, that what they mean by testing is that there are tests and there might be two, and they still told the truth. It's a mismatch in expectations and definitions and things like that, the nuances of defining what does that actually mean to you. And so what I usually tell people, and this is something that I practice in my own interviews and so forth, is learn how to formulate questions that will give you the answer as effectively as you can. So an example would be, if we latch on to my testing question, I wouldn't ask a person, do you do testing? I would ask, what is the test coverage of your project? Now, you and I hopefully both know that just having test coverage is not enough in of itself. That doesn't mean that the system is working or anything like that, but it is a very specific question. It's tailored to answering because there's only a range of answers that you can give here. And that means that there's no ambiguity. What is your coverage? And most managers will of course say, I don't know, or like so forth, that's the fundamental problem here. You're talking most likely to a person who doesn't know that. But if you were to ask me, for example, then I could tell you exactly what the test coverage is, and that will give you a better feel for how much testing are we actually doing. So if I tell you, oh, we have almost 90%, well, that's really good. And if I say, oh yeah, well, we don't really do test coverage, well, then you have no idea. You can't tell how much testing do they do. You can ask how many tests do they have. Like, you can get at specific metrics. You can't just ask a loose, ambiguous question and expect to get a very clear picture of what the reality looks like. You have to be informed enough to know what type of question needs to be answered. And for a manager and dealing with office politics, you have to be more specific. So if you were to ask, like, I would ask for clarification on specific details. And so if you're in general looking at, okay, how do you deal with office politics? Well, it's basically impossible to answer. But if you were to say, how many external dependencies do you have? Well, it's a little better. It's still super ambiguous. Like, what does that mean? I would do this. I would say, what is the most common concern and complaint for the software developers in your company? What are they usually unhappy about? That's very specific, because now you can answer that question. You can just say what complaint. It's basically the same thing as saying what complaints are you usually getting from the software teams. That will give you a much more a more specific answer to your it narrows the scope of the question so that it is so it becomes easier for the person, it becomes less speculative, and as I've said before, guys, if you want to see a an interview go completely down the drain very, very quickly, just ask, how do you do work in your company? What does your process look like? And they will give you, you can talk for an hour or 2 hours just talking about all kinds of stuff that has, well, it's not going to give you much. You're not going to get any details or anything like that, because it's going to be so high level. It's like asking, how do we solve world peace? You can talk for hours or weeks on that topic without ever necessarily going into anything very concrete. And it is the details. The devil's is in the details. Those details is the thing that will give you a more accurate understanding of how it goes. So I will tell you this. You can ask that, but my personal favorite when it comes to figuring out if this is going to be a good environment or not, it has more to do with, does the manager seem genuine or not? Because if that person has been there for only 6 months, it's very unlikely that they're going to have a lot of knowledge about how everything works and so forth. The key thing is, are they genuine? Do they seem to be the sort of person who's going to hear you out and try to do their best? Because sadly, even if you have a manager who is really, really good at their job and they're good at dealing with all this sort of stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have any net benefit to you, because as you and I, for example, we need to adapt to the system specifications. So you and I, we might know that if we change the code slightly, or we do things in a slightly better way, it's going to work better. But because the business requirements and the specifications of the system are made in a certain way, we can't. It has to work a certain way. Classic one is, you're going to do an integration to some API somewhere, and they don't support A, B, and C, and you have to do some weirdness in order to make it work. It doesn't feel nice, but you have to do it because there's no other way. And your manager has a similar situation. If they have a manager, the manager has a boss as well, and the company has its own policies and things like that. And even if you have a really nice and genuine manager who really tries their best in order to accommodate your needs and so forth, they might not be able to, due to other reasons, because they don't have final say on absolutely everything most of the time. So what I want you to take away from this is that the best question that I can give you in order to ask in an interview, in order to figure out if this is going to be, if you're going to have any issues with, as you say, office politics or stuff like that. Because as I said, guys, it's such a wide question that it could mean anything, and if you ask it to 3 different people, you might get very wildly different answers, and sometimes you're going to, most of the time, I would argue, you would probably leave without actually having gotten anything concrete you can think about. So my suggestion is, number one, this is at least what I do. Number one, is the person you're talking to, does it seem to be a genuine person? An intelligent, socially capable, and genuine person that you can have a good with good soft skills, basically. If it is such an individual, that is the best person that you can deal with first and foremost, because then you are at least guaranteed that if there are issues or anything like that, well, then you can come to this individual, to this manager, and speak your mind. You can have an open conversation with them, and most likely they're going to do their best to try to fix it for you. You can't know this about a person. That's sort of how it works for anything, right? How do you know if the person you're dealing with is going to be the love of your life, or a good leader, or a good carpenter? It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a stranger, well, you need a little bit of history to figure out how the nuts and the bolts and everything, how it operates. That's very difficult at your first encounter with them, but that will give you something. Do you get a sensation of the person being genuine? Second thing is, if you really are concerned about these reviews that you were talking about, and office politics and complaints and so forth, get into the details. What are people complaining about? Because the thing that maybe I'm complaining about that the coffee machine is really, really shit, and you don't drink coffee. well, then it doesn't matter to you, right? So try to get into those details. What are the most common complaints that this person has heard from the software developers, and what types of improvements are they requesting? Based on that, you're going to be able to extrapolate or like derive what the situation at the workplace probably is like. Have a great day.